Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of It's Old News, where this may be news to you, but it's old news. Last week, we talked about the tea arriving in Boston, the citizens of Boston holding another meeting at Faneuil Hall regarding what to do with the tea, an effigy of an enemy, William Kelly, who basically said some harsh words about the New York citizens, and they created an effigy of him and marched it through the streets of New York City and ultimately set it on fire in front of a coffee house, and a violent robbery by armed sailors in Boston. Let's get started on this week's episode. News from America. Boston, November 30th, 1773. Town meeting continued. So this is basically taking off right where we left last week's episode at the meeting at Faneuil Hall, where they're trying to decide on what to do with the tea. This picks up with Mr. Copley wanting to know that if he could convince the Clarks to attend this meeting, whether they would be treated with civility, though they might have different feelings, and also whether they would be safe until they returned from where they came. And the question being accordingly put, the answer was yes. Mr. Copley also asked for 2 hours, which was granted, adjourned until 2 p.m. So I was wondering this myself in the first couple episodes as I was reading a man named Mr. Copley, who is the son-in-law of Richard Clark, one of the tea consignees, and I did a little research myself and found out that this is, in fact, the one and only John Singleton Copley, the famous colonial painter, whose famous works of portraits of John Hancock, Sam Adams, and Paul Revere, among other works, are well known. And so that was pretty cool finding that out. The meeting resumed at 2 p.m. A motion was made and passed that Mr. Roch and Captain Hall be desired to give their attendance. Mr. Roch appeared, and upon a motion made, the question was asked whether it was the firm resolution of this body that the tea brought by Captain Hall shall be returned to England by Mr. Roch on the ship it came in. The answer was yes. Mr. Roch informed the meeting that he should protest the proceedings as he did yesterday, but he shall comply with the requirements of this body and return the tea. Captain Hall was forbidden from aiding or assisting the unloading of the tea at his peril, and if he remains master of the vessel, then he will carry the tea back to London. He replied that he will comply with their requirements. Upon a resolved motion, John Rowe, part owner of Captain Bruce's ship, expected soon with tea, and Mr. Timmins, factor for Captain Coffin's brig, be desired to attend. Mr. Ezekiel Cheever was appointed captain of the watch for the night, and there was enough volunteers. It was voted that the captain of the watch make a list of the watch for the next night, and each night this will continue until the vessels leave the harbor. Upon a motion, it was voted that in case the watch was in any way molested in the night while on duty, they give the alarm to the inhabitants by the tolling of the bells, and if anything were happened during the day, sound the alarm by ringing the bells. It was voted that 6 persons be appointed to be ready to give notice to the country towns upon any important occasion. 6 persons were accordingly chosen for that purpose. John Rowe attended and was informed that Mr. Roch agreed to send the tea back, and it was the expectation of this body that he would do the same when Captain Bruce arrives with the tea. Mr. Rowe replied that the ship was under the care of the master, but he will attempt to comply with the requirements and would give immediate notice when the ship arrives. It was voted that when Captain Bruce arrives, he will strictly conform to the votes passed respecting Captain Hall's vessel as though they had been all passed in reference to Captain Bruce's ship. Mr. Timmins appeared and informed that Captain Coffin's brig, expected with tea, was owned by Nantucket. He gave his word that no tea shall be landed or touched by anyone until the owner's arrival. It was then voted that what Mr. Rowe and Mr. Timmons had offered was satisfactory to the body. Mr. Copley returned and informed the body that he had gone to the castle and apologized for exceeding the 2 hours granted to him. He then stated he had met with all the tea consignees, and though he convinced them that they can attend the meeting with safety, they believe nothing would be satisfactory short of reshipping the tea, which is out of their power to do, and chose not to appear. They are willing to renew their proposal of storing the tea, but they could go no further without incurring their own ruin. It was then moved and the question asked whether the statements by the consignees were in the least degree satisfactory, and the answer was no. Whereas a number of merchants in this province have inadvertently imported tea from Great Britain while it is subject to the payment of a duty imposed upon it by an act of the British Parliament for the purpose of raising a revenue in America and appropriating the same without the consent of those who are required to pay it. Resolved, for importing said tea, they have justly incurred the displeasure of our brethren in the other colonies. And resolved further, that if any person shall hereafter import tea from Great Britain, or if any master of any vessel in Great Britain shall take the tea on board to be imported here until the unrighteous act is repealed, he or she shall be deemed an enemy to his country by this body. We will prevent the landing and sale of any tea and the payment of any duty, and we will enforce the return of the tea to the place from where it came. Resolved that the foregoing vote be printed and sent to England and all the seaports in this province. Upon a motion made and voted that fair copies be taken of the whole proceedings of the meeting and transmitted to New York and Philadelphia, and that Mr. Samuel Adams, Honorable John Hancock, William Phillips, John Rowe, Honorable Jonathan Williams be a committee to transmit the same. Voted, that is the determination of this body to carry their votes and resolutions into execution at the risk of their lives and property. Voted, that the Committee of Correspondence for this town is to make sure that every vessel with tea that arrives in the harbor has a proper watch appointed for her. Also voted, that those persons who desire to be a part of those nightly watches give their names at Mr. Eady's and Gill's printing office. Voted, that our brethren in the country are asked to assist upon the first notice given, especially upon the arrival of Captain Loring and Mr. Clark's brigantine. Voted, that those of this body who belong to the town of Boston do return their thanks to their brethren who have come from the neighboring towns for their countenance in union with this body in this exigence of our affairs. Voted, that the thanks of this meeting be given to Jonathan Williams for his good services as moderator. Boston, December 2nd, 1773. Reverend John Moorhead, dead. On Thursday, December 2nd, Reverend John Moorhead, pastor of the Presbyterian Church in Boston, departed this life at 70 years of age. The following Monday, his remains were interred with the utmost respect. It wasn't until 1730 that a Presbyterian church was organized in Boston. Under the leadership of the Reverend John Moorhead, a congregation named as the Church of the Presbyterian Strangers was organized. The congregation met in a barn, a renovated barn here on Long Lane, owned by someone named John Little. At some point, the rights to the barn was given to the congregation of the Presbyterian Strangers to use only for the purpose of their church for as long as they need. Eventually, they tore the barn down and built a more permanent building and location. And eventually, that actually also became the place that Massachusetts became a state. And eventually the street was renamed to Federal Street which we see right here on a modern map of Boston. Boston, 300 ships carrying tea. So I wanted to include this article because this gives like great context to see how many ships were actually being sent from England with tea on board for different ports in the colonies. Extract of a letter from London dated October 26th. The tea is shipped for New York, Philadelphia, Boston, and the vessels had all sailed some time ago, but put back and remain in the Downs, waiting for a favorable wind with 300 sail for different places. Philadelphia, December 9th, 1773. A ship arrives with tea? The ship Montague, Captain Pickle, is arrived at Philadelphia from London. He left the Downs the 5th of October in company with 200 sail and upwards, among which were the tea ship for Philadelphia and New York, but the next day the wind headed them so that many put back. When the Philadelphia pilots hailed the Montague and learned she was from London, they would not go on board until the captain assured them he had no tea on board, and then would not assist her further than Bombay Hook until he sent his boat up to town to know if it was the tea ship. New Haven, Connecticut, December 10th, 1773. Susquehanna affairs. The gentlemen who were appointed by our assembly in the last session to consult the governor of Pennsylvania on Susquehanna affairs have set off for Philadelphia at the beginning of this week on that business. So this is a bit of a lengthy handbill that was posted up in various, all over Philadelphia on December 4th, 1773. Instead of kind of creating a synopsis here of it, I'm going to read the whole thing in full because I think out of anything I've read so far in the past few weeks making these episodes, this is the one thing here that I feel like really explains the anger and fear the colonists have over the duty on the tea and the repercussions of it if it was accepted, and what it would mean for the future in the colonies and their liberty, essentially. A mechanic's plea about tea. The following handbill has been distributed throughout the city. To the tradesmen and mechanics of the province of Pennsylvania, my dear and much respected brethren. At a time when a corrupt and prostituted ministry are pointing their destructive machines against the sacred liberties of the Americans, the eyes of all Europe are upon us, and much is expected from the known resolution and conduct of the Pennsylvanians, amongst whom the industrious and respectable body of tradesmen and mechanics bear a very large proportion. The pointy question is whether we have property of our own or not. Whether our property and the dear earned fruits of our labor are at our own disposal, or shall be wantonly wrested from us by a set of luxurious, abandoned, and piratical hirelings, to be appropriated by them to increase the number of such infamous pensioners and support their unlimited extravagance, the result depends on our determined virtue and integrity as so important a crisis. The nature of the detestable tea scheme and the pernicious consequences of submitting to receive it among us, subject to a duty payable here and levied on us without our consent, have been so judiciously set forth and demonstrated by abler pens as to leave no room for one of my capacity to undertake it. If the trifling duty of 3d were only to be considered, it would not be worth our while to oppose it, nor worthwhile for the ministry so strenuously to insist on and take off in lieu thereof a much greater sum payable in London. But that by this breach, though small, they will enter the bulwark of our sacred liberties, and will never desist till they have made a conquest of the whole. These arbitrary measures we have virtuously opposed hitherto, Let us, for our own sakes, for our posterity's sake, for our country's sake, steadfastly persevere in opposing to the end. Corruption, extravagance, and luxury are seldom found in the habitations of tradesmen. Industry, economy, prudence, and fortitude generally inhabit there, and I expect to see these commendable virtues shine forth upon the present occasion with more than brilliant luster. Let not the artful insinuation of our enemies that the duty will be paid in England by the East India Company and not in America have any weight among us. This is one of the tolls to ensnare us. The Act of 7th of George III expressly lays the aforesaid duty on all teas imported in America from England payable on its landing here. No private contract between the East India Company and the Lords of the Treasury, no power under the Crown, nor even the King himself, can dispense with, set aside, disannul, or make void such a clause or any other in any act of Parliament, but the same power and authority by which it was enacted. The grand point in view is, by every artifice, to enslave the American colonies and to plunder them of their property, and what is more, their birthright, liberty. It is therefore highly incumbent on us unitedly, with heart and soul, to resist the diabolical delusion and despise the infamous projectors. But supposing the act was repealed, and the tea could be imported free of any duty, import, or custom, yet is it not a most gross and daring insult to pilfer the trade from the Americans and lodge it in the hands of the East India Company? Let us not be prevailed upon to suppose that this will affect the merchants only. We need not concern ourselves with it. It will first most sensibly affect the merchants, but it will also very materially affect you, me, and every member of the community. The East India Company at present have shipped their desperate adventure in chartered bottoms. It was prudent to do so, or else possibly their obnoxious vessels and cargoes might become a sacrifice to the resentment of a much injured and exasperated people. The same consideration might probably have induced them to appoint our merchants their agents to support the first heat of action, rightly judging that if we would chastise our friends with whips, we should chastise their factors with scorpions. But if they can once open the channel of trade to themselves, they will hereafter ship their teas in their own bottoms. They have passed a gross affront upon our merchants in appointing such, whom we respect, commissioners. Hereafter, if they succeed, they will send their own factors and creatures, establish houses among us, ship us all other East India goods, and in order to full freight their ships, take in other kinds of goods at under freight, or more probably ship them on their own accounts to their own factors, and undersell our merchants till they monopolize the whole trade. The East India Company, if once they get footing in this once happy country, will leave no stone unturned to become your masters. They are an opulent body, and money or credit is not wanting amongst them. They have a designing, depraved, and despotic ministry to assist and support them. They themselves are well versed in tyranny, plunder, oppression, and bloodshed. Whole provinces laboring under the distresses of oppression, slavery, famine, and the sword are familiar to them. Thus they have enriched themselves. Thus they are becoming the most powerful trading company in the universe. Be, therefore, my dear fellow tradesmen, prudent, be watchful, be determined to let no motive induce you to favor the accursed scheme. Reject every proposal but a repealing act. Let not their baneful commodity enter your city. Treat every alder or abettor with ignominy and contempt, and let your whole deportment prove to the world that we will be free indeed. A mechanic. That ends the news from America. On to news from Europe. Constantinople, Turkey, August 17th. It is conjectured that ministers of the Porte have been deliberating with one of the other foreign ministers regarding a treaty where a certain power will declare war against Russia. This treaty has been known to be in the works for a while, with the delay being that both parties have not agreed on subsidies. Seville, Spain, August 27th. Extract of the letter from Seville, August 27th. 5,000 troops have just arrived here from Aragon to be embarked on the fleet here for the West Indies. It consists of 6 sail of the line, 2 frigates, a sloop, and some transports. The ships of war are to supply those on the island of Cuba and to relieve the garrison stationed at Havana. The ships now at Cuba are to then sail and be stationed in the Bay of Honduras. Leghorn, or Livorno, Italy, September 8th. The General Murray, an English merchant ship, arrived here last Monday from Algiers and Port Mahon. She had on board 104 Christian slaves redeemed at Algiers by the benevolence of the Empress Queen of Hungary. Moscow, Russia, September 10th. Letters from Moscow bring an account of a terrible fire in which 2 entire streets had been destroyed without the inhabitants being able to save any of the edifices within them. Warsaw, Poland, September 11th. Yesterday, Lukowski and Cybulski were executed as regicides for the abduction of King Stanislaw August Poniatowski in 1771. Kozinski, Offenburg, Pazinski, and Lukowski's wife were all brought there as well to be attendants of the execution. Afterwards, the executioner made a speech to the people advising them to be careful how they bring up their children to avoid the unhappy end of the unfortunate wretches who were just executed. Lastly, the 2 men who died in prison, Tubalowitz and Hegwazowski, were hung up at the gallows. Lukowski's wife also died from shock 3 days later in prison. The famous Kaczynski is determined to go to America, and government is said to have given him 1,000 ducats to defray his expenses. From the Danube, 1714. According to our last advices, the Grand Vizier's army is encamped at Ichumla, General Squidikow at Likarest, General Goltemkin near Obolest, Field Marshal Romanzow near Gara, Polomitsa, and General Unger near Ismail. The 8th and 10th of last month, the Turks of Silistria appeared before Hersowa with 47 boats, each containing 70 or 80 men, but undertook nothing, partly on the account of the bad weather. The Russian garrison of Hersowa, which was only 500 men strong, was reinforced with half as many more, and several detachments of troops have come to guard it from any surprises. It is thought that Russians plan on once again passing the Danube, which General Unger has already done at Ismail. These preparations make it apprehended that the Russians intend to make a second attempt at taking Silistria. From Moldavia. Authentic advices from Moldavia say the army of the Turkish Grand Vizier has been reinforced by 40,000 well-disciplined troops since the late engagement near Silistria, and the General Bibikow, with his corps, is impatiently expected at the Russian Grand Army, as Count Romanzow is not able to undertake anything of consequence until he receives a considerable reinforcement. Warsaw, Poland, September 15th. Last Saturday, the delegates signed the Treaty of Renunciation to the provinces in favor of the King of Prussia. The city of Danzig was not included, the discussion that being postponed to another occasion. It is reported that if the plan is enacted, the government of the Republic will be taken from the king and entrusted to a perpetual council. The plan has already been approved by the delegation and could be approved soon by the Diet. If this plan takes place, the council will enjoy all the rights of the sovereignty, and the king will be only a mere image at the head of the Republic. Warsaw, Poland, also September 15th. Extract of a letter from Warsaw. We informed by good authority that the government, which is to be introduced into this kingdom, is to be of the following. 1. The Republic is to keep its full liberty of electing the Polish king. The candidates for king must be Roman Catholics, also natives of Poland. Not the king's son or grandson is to offer himself as candidate. The chief legislative power is to consist of a council at which the king is to preside, to have no more than 1 vote. Everything must be decided by king and council, and one without the other is to be nothing at all. The king is to be so limited that he is not able to give a place or pension, not even able to invest in any body with the order of the White Eagle without the majority of the council, and the crown army is to consist of 30,000 men, the head officers of which are to be foreigners. No one who is in the ecclesiastical order is to be a member of that council. That dissidents have a right to be members of the council. Warsaw, Poland, September 11th. They write from Warsaw that the estates of the Jesuits in that kingdom are valued at 2 million sterling and will be annexed to the crown, and the rents applied to the supporting of the king's household. Hamburg, Germany, September 21st. The King of Prussia has ordered a camp to be marked out near Potsdam, in which the garrison of Potsdam and part of Berlin will be encamped. These troops will amount to 40,000 men who are to perform diverse new maneuvers. The greatest part of the general officers have been recalled to be present at it. Hamburg, Germany, September 21st. Advice is just received of a decisive battle between the Turks and the Persians near Omidorme, on the borders of Syria, and that the Persians obtained a complete victory over 3 times the number of Turks under command of Siha the Marste. Could not find any place called Omidorme on the map, so I kind of highlighted the modern border between Syria and Turkey here, and the town must have been somewhere around here and no longer exists or has been renamed, and I couldn't find any mention of it. Munkholm, Denmark, October 1st. It is said that Colonel Falkenscheid has obtained his liberty after being detained in the castle of Munkholm since the revolution in Denmark. Otto von Falkenscheid was sentenced to life imprisonment for his support of Privy Councillor Count Johann Struensee. So this is not Otto here. This is Arnoldus von Falkenscheid. It's the only person I could find as part of this person's family. This is the brother of Otto. Can assume he looks something similar to this, so I figured might as well include the photo for some context. Count Johann Struensee was the royal physician to Christian VII, the King of Denmark, who had an affair with the Queen and took control of the government in 1771. He was later arrested, tried, and executed for usurping the royal authority in contravention of the royal law, especially since he was a commoner. Ballyvally, Ireland, October 2nd. On Sunday night, September 26th, the house of Thomas McCullough of Ballyvally, between Banbridge and Guildford, was burned to the ground by the Hearts of Steel, together with all his turf, hay, and corn. His wife and children barely escaped the flames, and the poor man was badly burnt attempting to save them. He had been threatened with this injury if he did not surrender a farm to his landlord that he had taken at a higher rate than those deluded wretches ordered land to be let for in that part of the country. The Hearts of Steel, or Steel Boys, was an exclusively Protestant movement that was started in response to the sharp rise in rents and evictions. Now, I couldn't find a town named Ballyvally since the article mentioned that it was between Banbridge and Guildford. I found both of those towns and have them marked in the smaller circles here, so I'm assuming somewhere in the middle here, Ballyvally existed and no longer does. I also noticed when kind of looking into these Hearts of Steel people that a culmination of their kind of protests happened at the Battle of Guildford, the town we see on the left there, where kind of like a big battle broke out between the nobles and their kind of small army there and the protesters. Eventually, England sent the army out to squash the Hearts of Steel, which effectively ended the protests. Although I found it interesting that I was looking this in Wikipedia, it said that the army was sent out in 1772 and squashed them, but this article is from 1773, so I don't know if there was still a small contingent of Steel Boys out there that were still trying to carry on the movement and in smaller fashion still in 1773. Hamburg, Germany, September 21st. They write from Hanover that the Russian Captain Janov passed through that city on his way from London to Petersburg. This is the third courier that has passed through this city from London within 8 days. It appears the Pacific Court of Great Britain is endeavoring all in its power to bring about a peace between the Russians and Turks. And that's it for the news from Europe and for this episode. Thanks for watching. Check back next week for more stories from the past on It's Old News. See you again.